Greetings, listeners, and welcome to The Spiritual Experience, a show where we share stories of life, love, and redemption for all of humanity on Earth. So sit back and enjoy. Try to identify with the speakers and not compare. Don't forget to subscribe on all podcast platforms. I'm your host, Jay Lewis, and here we go. All right, everybody, we're back. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are, however you are, whomever you are. All right. I told you guys I'm going to have one of my close friends come in here. He wrote this book years ago, and, it's called 50 Things to Do Before Seeing a Psychiatrist and How to Actually Do Them. And oddly enough, on my journey, it came into my life, Well, he's been in my life almost the whole time, but the book came at a very opportune time, because I have, my kids, and they were just starting to reach teenage years, and, what does dad know, But then, this book came into my house, and, here and there I'd see one of them reading it on the couch, and some of it would make sense to them, and some of it wouldn't, but none of it, it's like, practical, take the crayons and color inside the lines if you want your life to be better. It's not super psychosis, whatever. It's just regular human being practical things that you can do for your mental and emotional well-being. Either way, his name is Joe Baldazone. And Joe, say hello.
Hello.
All right, perfect. Joe, thank you so much for joining us. Number one, where are you from?
I am from Brooklyn, New York. I grew up in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn.
Nice. Okay. And you had siblings, or what was it like in your house?
2 brothers, one a year and a half older, one 4 years younger. And growing up was, a lot different than growing up today, because we were actually able to play on the street and do stuff and hide and go seek and all that kind of thing. We didn't even have call waiting at the time when I was growing up. So,
my God.
Yeah, I'm older than people think I am usually. But, yeah, I had a fairly normal childhood for people in Bensonhurst at that time.
I also think, and we talk about this a lot on the show, and the difference between, and there's no difference. We're not talking down for millennials or other kids that are born in this time. But during our time, there was obviously no internet. So you literally only knew what you knew. Your neighborhood, if you didn't leave your neighborhood,
right.
You didn't leave your neighborhood.
Nothing existed outside of it.
Right.
Well,
so
if you didn't go to a library, you didn't know.
Right. So even if you went to a library, it was Encyclopedia Britannica, that's how much you're going to learn about Boise, Idaho, versus now you can go online and do YouTube and whatever and find, all these things that were just not part of our life, that weren't if somebody didn't have a woo-woo meditation book, I would never even know what that would have been when I was a kid.
I think even things as simple as if we said, how old's Bruce Springsteen? Back then, you couldn't find out. You have to go all over the place to find somebody who knew how old Bruce Springsteen was.
Or if they told you, you would just have to believe them.
Right.
Yeah, there's no fact checking. So you talk about this a little bit in your book, and we'll just touch on it. But eventually, you started, drinking and doing stuff, and your life went down a little bit of the dark alley, so to speak. How did that come into your life?
All right. I guess, like I said, I had a fairly normal childhood. If anything, I was born introverted and I was born shy. And I think I was always anxious. I didn't do, sitting in a classroom was tough for me from kindergarten.
Right. So before drinking, you had these things.
Yeah. I definitely had this. I think I was born with an anxiety disorder. And when I got into high school, I hid in corners, I wasn't very social. I got into building models when I was young. I got into playing instruments. I picked up a guitar. I loved staying in the house. I loved drawing. I loved painting. I loved the arts. and I was totally fine by myself. I didn't want to deal with
Just
people.
creating by yourself, like.
And yeah, that was always me. And my parents used to yell at me, "Oh, get outside! You need to get out of the house." And I didn't want to. Anyway, I dropped out of high school because I actually met a girl, which was, I say I didn't even realize this till I was sober for a while, but that young lady was my first drug, and it's like. I remember at the time that we just started dating, I said the world could split open in front of me right now, and I wouldn't care. Like I was on top of the world. I felt high from her being in my life, and I was 17 years old when we met, and at 18 years old, she dumped me in a not so nice way, and then the whole world caved in on me, and I didn't want to live anymore from that point. I just thought I'd never be able to meet another young lady. I couldn't go to clubs. I felt really uncomfortable in the world, and I discovered alcohol.
Right, and you were how old?
At that time, I'd say first time. I'm terrible with numbers and years and stuff, but at about 17 was when I first felt the effects of alcohol.
Right. So then looking back, thinking about it this way, it's like, okay, well, you have, you're getting this this relief with your creative space in your home. Like there's a space for you. Yeah. And you're doing it and you're getting all this joy. And then you run into a girl, which is part of just like, it could be one of those 80s, Breakfast at Tiffany's kind of movies, but like it's part of the progression. Like, oh, boy meets this girl, blah, blah, blah. Then there's other relief that happens. And then when that relief gets squashed, then you're like, oh shit, what do I do? And then alcohol shows up. Mm-hmm. So what happened?
What happened was it was my savior. I remember this clearly. I don't know who remembers. I don't know who your listeners are, but there was a club in Brooklyn, a rock and roll club, L'Amour. And first time I felt the effects of alcohol, I think somebody bought me 3 rusty nails. I drank them, and the whole universe changed for me. All of a sudden, I say sometimes like my feet felt like they grew roots. I became good looking. I became confident. I became indestructible, and it gave me all the self-esteem and everything that I always kind of wished I had and saw in other people, but I was incapable of. And anyway, I remember it was the 3rd time I was in there, and this time I ordered the 3 drinks, and they were small glass, and I ran up to a balcony.
You ordered 3 at one time?
Yes, I ordered 3, went up in the balcony, I lined them up, and I said, all right, when I drink these 3 rusty nails, I don't even remember what was in them. Drambuie, I don't know.
I'm scared to look it up. I'm scared to look it up.
It was just 2 things, Drambuie and some sort of liquor. But anyway, I sat there and I drank them, and I said, you're going to become an alcoholic. Like I said, I'm going to become an alcoholic. I kind of...
Like you had a voice in your mind saying that, okay,
I think it was a no-brainer. It wasn't even a voice in my mind. It was, I'm going to do this from now on because it makes me feel so good. And I accepted it. I said my life was so different from the effects of alcohol that I accepted it. I said, all right, so I'll be an alcoholic. It's not like, I don't know, I was a 17-year-old kid. It didn't matter to me. I just said, I'm going to start doing this. And I had a job at the time. I was working for a messenger service, and I started using alcohol on the job immediately. I'd buy pints of beer. Like anytime I was faced with anything, I just started saying, okay, a pint of beer will do it, and that would give me just enough. I say now medication. It was just enough medication to do anything that I needed to do. And I immediately dove into it, and I said, I'm good with this. The reward was so worth it that, yeah, I had no problem with
the consequences. It didn't matter.
To be honest, I didn't realize what the price was going to be that I'd be paying for it. I thought I'd just get labeled a drunk, and that was it. And that wasn't a big deal to me back then. Yeah,
but even still, it's not another vein that I stay in. And for those of you who get annoyed with me saying the same things over and over, too fucking bad. But like, it's not an what you're doing is not an abnormal thing for a teenager who's going through adolescence and going through evolution and going through like puberty and like a breakup. Like who wouldn't want 3 rusty nails? Or like like the equation makes sense.
Those
But then,
were my tool. That was the tool. I had no other tools, and
Right.
that worked. That was one perfect tool at that time.
well, and the other thing is that tool is instantaneous. So if somebody said, Joe, I think you should join karate and then start meditating and then do A, B, C, X, Y, Z, we'd be like, yeah, but a 17-year-old Joe, or even me, would say, yeah, that makes sense, but I don't even know, but 3 rusty nails is all I need. You know, or this pint is all I need.
Right.
So it's to ask somebody to not make that choice, it's a tall ask for a human being, especially 17 years old. But then you saw it, you know, it got out of control, obviously, you know, and then you found your way, you know, into, and I know you go into it a little bit in the book, like your anxieties, were they really coming like while you were drinking or after you stopped? Like the severe anxieties?
Well, what happened was, I want to try to keep it short. That the first year that I was drinking like that, things went excellently. I got into a
It
band
worked.
playing. Yeah, it totally worked. Then all of a sudden, I experienced something that to this day I still can't describe. People say it was a panic attack. I sometimes even question if it was a panic attack or maybe some drugs I had taken earlier or whatever. But I was in a movie theater with a girl. Things couldn't have been better in my life. And all of a sudden, I got hit with this absolute horror that was going on in my head that wasn't like I didn't lose my breath or think I was having a heart attack. I just felt like I was going insane, like my brain shifted and reality, everything in reality changed. And it was, I don't know, the best way I just felt like everything in the universe was wrong and it was never ever going to be right again. And it was all inside my head and it scared the fucking shit out of me. Like I had no control over it. I was absolutely terrified, and if I honestly
It
feel
seemingly came out of nowhere?
it came out of absolutely nowhere. I was just sitting there, and it's almost like it came out of the sky, and I was possessed or something. And I feel like if I were to equate it with physical pain, like if somebody was just stabbing me in the neck with a knife or something, if that had lasted, if that was nonstop, I honestly feel like I'd have no choice but to blow my brains out or to end it, because I couldn't, there's no way I could tolerate the psychic pain or the mental pain I had. And thank God it only lasted, it's hard to say now because it was so long, but maybe it lasted a minute. And then like
That's a long minute to
yeah.
be feeling that.
If it even lasted that long, that's what it felt like. Well, actually, it felt like a lifetime. But I immediately got terrified. I didn't know what was going on. And then what happened was I learned later that the fear of that happening again brought it on all the more often. Like that night, it happened in little bursts. Like throughout the night, I'd get like a panic. It would happen and it would go away, and it would happen and it would go away.
Did you tell the girl, or were you just...
No, I was in my own hell. I just I didn't even know I didn't know what was going on. There was no way I could explain it. There was no way I could talk about it. And I just started kind of entering, I entered like a new world.
Right. So
Everything
then
changed.
what happens next?
What happens next was alcohol became for me not a choice anymore.
Right.
Like I was using it before to say, okay, I have a stressful situation coming up. I'm going to drink. I'm going to do it. Now I had to drink. Because
Do you think it was in your mind, and it's hard to tell because we both have this affliction, whether it's choice or whether it's no choice, but maybe you were just like, if I drink, maybe I can keep this at bay, like that fear, that anxiety attack or whatever, or you were just like, dude, I just have to drink?
It was both. Like it's how I kept it at bay, and it worked. It
Right,
worked
okay.
excellently. Like if I started getting a panic attack, and I had wine, I'm thinking back, Carlo Ross said, "Buy by the gallon and hide behind a curtain in my room." It was $3.49 a gallon. It was all
Very
like,
romantic.
yeah. And, but I'd have that, and like just a glass of that would make the anxiety go away. So I started just doing that constantly. I mean, I also found I met a woman that dealt Valium, and I started doing that. Benzos. Now I think I forget the name. There's much more common benzos now that people take.
Yeah, they're mixing and matching, but you're medicating yourself.
Yeah,
you're keeping this at bay. For how long until the bottom came?
The bottom came when I was 23.
Speak a little closer to the mic.
The bottom came pretty much when I hit 23. It was slow, like it kept progressing because my world, I didn't mention that when the panic attacks were happening, I'd become terrified of going to those places. Like in the movie theater, I wouldn't go back to a movie theater. Then the train, then it happened in New York City, and it just started happening all over the place. And depression was sinking in with that.
Is there like a technical name for that specific fear where you just like...
They call it agoraphobia when people start getting afraid of walking out their front door. And I had.
Did you know that at the time? That's what it was?
No, that's it. There was one friend who I was sharing this stuff with, and he didn't have a clue. He was my drinking buddy, who is ironically still a very good friend of mine.
Oh.
But
what about your parents? Like
my parents, I managed to stay away from them. They knew that I was a mess. My father knew I was an alcoholic, and because I was drinking so much, it's really blurry. Like I can't say exactly how I got around them, but I know I was up all night and slept all day, and they, I don't know, maybe in a very codependent way, just were saying prayers for me or just hoping one day I'd come around. But I managed to avoid them, and I hardly ever saw them. They both worked. Anyway, just to speed things up, my world was getting darker and darker, and I couldn't even, like, I'd make job interviews saying, wow, if I get a job, maybe things will change. And then I'd wind up wasted the night before and not be able to go on the job interview. I made appointments with psychiatrists, and I'd be wasted, and I couldn't go to the I couldn't get out of the house. I couldn't do anything to help myself anymore. I somehow attracted women. I don't know why, but I had a fair amount of girls to date, and I always thought that, okay, maybe a girl could fix this, and I'd go out with somebody for a little while, and nothing was changing. Things just kept getting worse and worse, and I got obsessed with how I was going to end my life and hurt the least amount of people. And
that was a conscious thought?
All the time. Like the last 2 years of my drinking, it was just, how am I going to do this? I don't want to talk about the suicidal... But
it was there, yeah.
Right. But then, I don't want to talk about, I had plans. Like, there were ways I was going to do this where it would look like an accident. And then, in the end, I had a couple of experiences where I came close. And then, maybe if we ever do this again, like, there were some experiences I think were nothing other than angel experiences that somebody, like, popped up that stopped me somehow from doing it. But anyway, the very last night, I said, I'm doing it tonight. And I had an extension cord. I had a little bit of a bottle of vodka left. And I said, when this is gone, I'm hanging myself over my doorknob. I was going to flip it over the door. I tried as much as I could. I put it around my neck. I was feeling and I didn't have the guts to do it. And like, my surrender came that night. That morning. My father was getting up for work, and I called him into my bedroom, and I said, I need help. Help me.
Right. And what happened next?
What happened next was I needed help for, like, my thing was for the depression, the phobias, and all that stuff. Alcohol, to me, was just the slightest part of my problem. And, like, that was like nothing compared to what was going on. But he called up, knowing a little bit more about drinking, he called up a friend of his who he knew had recovered from drinking, and they got together and they decided that the best thing to do was put me in a hospital, put me in a detox. And I agreed only because I knew it would be a good idea to get the alcohol out of my system. I said, maybe, like, that'll be the start of figuring out what the hell to do. But I wanted to go to a mental hospital. But anyway, they had me put in a detox. And
which we always recommend, that if you have a severe drinking problem, we always recommend that there's no shame in being medically removed from alcohol. That you go to a detox over the weekend. Don't try and do it yourself in your house with all this other stuff. Like with alcohol leaving your body, you could die, depending on, there's a lot of other factors going on. And so whoever's listening, if don't ever be scared or ashamed of going, and having some medical help you with that part. So that was a good thing. So you go to the detox, and what's going on over there?
What you got to remember too, this was 1984, so I had no clue what a detox was. I didn't know anything about any recovery programs, and I honestly thought they were going to strap me down to a bed and I was going to sweat it out. And when I got in, they were nice to me, and I said, "Wow!" And they even gave me drugs when I said, "This is awesome."
Right.
They detoxed me with Librium. But I remember being most astounded by the fact that they were nice to me, because I felt like I'm a piece of shit. Like, I've done nothing good for for my life. I haven't done anything. And they were really kind. And the most important thing that happened in that detox was when I was in bed, right in front of me, I guess intentionally at the time, there were the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I didn't know anything about recovery, Alcoholics Anonymous. It was the furthest thing from my mind. And I asked, what are those numbers? What is that list up there? And I don't remember exactly what the nurse said, but she said, that's how you will get better, something along those lines.
Right.
And I was confused, but I read them, and they made no sense to me. But somehow, step number 3, which is... I'm blanking.
No, step 3.
Turn our life and our will over to the care of God as we understand. This is something I didn't mention earlier. I went to Catholic school. I never, and still don't, believe in the God that I learned about in Catholic school.
Not the bearded white guy in the sky with the scales. How dare you? I'm keeping a list, checking it twice. That's Santa Claus. No.
Well, I don't even say. I respect that people have different beliefs,
no,
and I really do, because my belief today is that God,
that was a joke, people.
But God comes to people in different ways, if they want God to come to them,
right?
And I respect even people that are atheists.
And in that moment, what were you thinking?
In that moment, what I was thinking honestly was that whatever this thing that God is in the universe, I felt like. Well, at that time, I felt like, wow, God is saying, Joe, you're really freaking stupid, so I'm going to lay it out in numbers for you. But I loved the way the 3rd step was written, and I said, I can do that, and I can do that right now. And I gave probably the most sincere prayer of my life, where I said, God, whatever the fuck you are, whoever you are, whatever you might be, I don't believe in you, but please, what it says in this thing here, I turn my life and my will completely over to you, completely, everything, you got it, like, help me. I couldn't go any lower, and I know...
And sincere,
I begged.
Right.
Sincere isn't even, to me, it was... I have to do something or die. Like, I didn't have the guts to kill myself. I didn't have the guts to live. And I knew something had to change. And I honestly believe that, like I said, I don't, and again, no disrespect to anybody who does believe this, but I don't believe in a man in the clouds saying, okay, now I'm going to fix you, because it does, I know it doesn't work that way, but there was something inside me that clicked. And I think that I made some sort of contact with a benevolent power in the universe that
was greater than you.
Made things start happening. Like, people started coming into my life. I started hearing things that clicked. I started listening differently than I ever listened before.
You became willing.
I was completely willing. And
how long were you in the detox and stuff before you came home?
5 days that I was in the detox, and then the day that I came home, it was funny, because I still, my agoraphobia didn't go away. I was terrified. Now it was the first time I was seeing the world through sober glasses. In the past 4 years, I drank and took drugs every single day.
Right.
And now I was terrified. I was home. I still wasn't going to set foot out the front door.
Right. So the drinking was gone, the drugs were gone, but you were still there.
Right. I was still there, and I was still terrified. I was still very, very, very sick. And that day, my father's friend, who was this big guy, I mean, when I got sober, I was 128 pounds, and I'm 5'7". I'm not a big guy. And this guy, 6'3", and he wasn't an intimidating guy, to be honest, but he was a big guy, and he rang the doorbell 6 o'clock the day I'm out of the hospital. And he said, "You're coming with me, Joe." And he took me to this recovery place, and it was amazing. He started taking me to do the things that I wouldn't have been able to do on my own. And that was a blessing. Like that benevolent power, that higher power that I was calling.
Because like somehow you being with this guy, getting the help that you needed from this guy, it brought you to that you wouldn't have gone on your own. Like it just, like it emotionally, mentally, physically, it just wasn't possible for you. It wasn't in the cards. You weren't going to walk out of your house with, at the time, a meeting book and be like, okay, I'm going to take the train to Avenue O and blah, blah, blah. I'm going to walk into a room with people I don't know and throw $1 in the basket. Like that wasn't going to happen.
Not a chance that it could have happened. Forget that it wasn't going to.
It doesn't exist.
Right. There's no way I could have done that. And
so you start going through your process. You start recovering. And so how did you manage to start to look at the things other than alcohol? Now that alcohol was not like a paramount issue for you.
All right. Well, what happened, I think, again, it's so hard for me to be accurate on exactly how things happened early on, but I knew I was seeing the people around me, they were not like me. Like people that were hanging out in these groups we were hanging out in were like...
And that's when like AA was like there, or, you know, AA, NA, whatever, all those 12-step programs, people don't understand. There was a time in history when it was like the thing to do. And like there were people going on, there were like sober clubs and like, you
well,
know?
this was right before that time happened. That was this was right before then. But there were people in there and everybody, like I remember seeing people come, I have 30 days clean and sober and I feel great. And I'm looking forward to doing this. And I was a mess. I couldn't open my mouth. And I was coming up on like a month without drinking, and I knew that I was going to drink and take drugs again. It was going to happen. I still couldn't function, and they had recommended. They gave me a phone number for a rehab when I was in detox, and I called them up. I think this was the first positive move that I made for myself. I picked up the phone shaking and called and said I need help, and they took me in. And I think that's when I started like learning about this, like learning that I needed to do other things. And I still think that that's part of the third step with me. Like, there's the book Alcoholics Anonymous that a lot of people follow precisely what it says, and it works. And I think that's awesome. And I think that people get sober in their own, everybody gets sober in a different way. For me, when I turned my life and will over to God's care, I felt like it opened the world up to like a whole bunch of help that I needed. And I would never say no to anything. Like I hear people say that there's something lately where people say treatment center stuff, that will kill you, that's damaging, that's this and that's that. I think it may be that some of those people just weren't ready at the time they went, or weren't trusting.
They're just like negative people who don't understand that there's more than one way to do anything. Like the common thread that you and I have is that like our life had this pivot, and that pivot was in 12-step recovery. But that's just the pivot. Like going forward, like I've been involved in therapy for a gazillion years. I've been in, meditation, not like, like actual meditation practice, other spiritual practices. One of the best books I ever read in my life, and I only read it once, but that's all I needed. It was called The Spirituality of Imperfection. And it was just about like being. And it's okay with the good and the bad, and not fighting your fear. Like not like, if I did, like not fighting the fear, but just saying, listen, fear is part of being alive, and it can come and then it can go, and I don't have to do anything on my own, and all of these other things. So like, even though like maybe the ground floor of the home of my recovery home, and recovery is just like recovery, it's not just tied into 12-step programs, but the ground floor, that's where it started, because that was the first place where maybe I didn't have all the ideas. And all these other ideas started opening up for me, because there's nothing in that book that says, listen, you are an agoraphobic. Is that the right word?
Agoraphobic.
You're an agoraphobic, with anxieties and all of these like legit clinical things that are not in this blue book. You know, so how did you say, okay, I need this for this, and then what were the other things that were being introduced to you?
Okay, it wasn't at that time. There were no conscious decisions. Well, I guess there were realistically, but again, I was open to anything. So if you said try this, I tried this, and I don't care what it was, and I was willing to give everything 100%. And there were a couple of things that didn't work for me, but I gave like anything that was put in my path. I said okay, and I just went with it. So I felt like my foundation was in the 12 steps, because I the day I was out of I wanted to know everything I could about all of those steps, and I did. I jumped into the first, and oddly enough, I didn't believe I was powerless over alcohol, and I wasn't about to even say that. And I told the people that were helping me, I don't believe it. And I did everything else. I jumped into all the other ones. But anyway, getting back to, I guess, where we were with the rehab. In the rehab, they had me talk to psychologists, and they had me talk to the count, and I started learning a little bit about panic, and then they started giving me tools. And these are the tools that I think a lot of people say nowadays, those tools will, TC centers will kill you. I think some people see these helpful things as a solution, like they think, okay, like a deep breathing will get me drunk. No, deep breathing, like for me, I needed to do deep breathing as part of my recovery.
Did somebody introduce that to you?
Yeah, they did in there. They introduced me to deep breathing. They introduced me to the ideas of being a victim, that if we consider ourselves a victim, like some of us, myself included, have been victims of horrible things. But once we are going to go forward and start making a sober path for ourselves, staying in that definition or in that mode doesn't help. Like it happened in the past, and absolutely it happened. So it's not denying that, but it's saying, okay, how can I start not to keep viewing myself as a victim? Because today I'm not. I'm not being victimized by the things I was victimized by then. So we had a class on that. We had a class on, was it you I was talking to the other day about no is a complete sentence?
Yeah, no is a complete sentence.
Yeah, technically I don't know if that's true, but it got drilled home that no, like you can just say, and I remember that, and I remember learning about deep breathing, and
I think the victim thing is very important, because a lot of times, even when I'm dealing with my kids or like other people, or even, people that I'm sponsoring or people that I'm helping, like it's very clear what you're saying. Like nobody is saying that this didn't happen. Mm-hmm. Whatever it is, we're saying that we love you and we know that this happened and we are sorry. But we also know that going forward, we're going to have to learn how to live with this. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying you need to get over it. Mm-hmm. Which is what sometimes people hear, or what I would hear when I'm like, you're not acknowledging. I need the validation. I need the acknowledgement that somebody did this to me. Mm-hmm. And you guys were, and I learned, in recovery and a lot in therapy that yes, that's true, but you don't get over everything, but we can teach you how to live with it.
Right. And over time, the pain from that stuff gets less and less, and I learned to deal with things, in a different way. But yeah, I went blank for a second. But I guess just going back, in the rehab, I started getting introduced to a whole bunch of different things, and it may have been around for a long time before this, but I remember we even had this booklet that was essentially what cognitive behavioral therapy is. It was CBT, and they just didn't call it that at the time, but I remember going through this book and practicing the exercises in there, and I started to realize that I could start looking at the world in a different way. I could start acting in a different way. I could start, by doing that, I'd start, I didn't know at the time, but I saw by practicing these things, I did start to feel different, and I left the rehab with a ton of hope. They really gave me a whole new toolbox. I first had the toolbox of the 12 steps, which is the foundation for everything in my life today, and still is. 37 years on this path. and that's still the foundation. But then they gave me this other little toolbox, and then I took that other little toolbox out, and then I went living my life. And
What were some of the major changes that started to happen for you once you started using the new tools?
All right, there's something I guess I want to put this out there. Nothing happened overnight, but with these tools, I think some of the main things was it gave me what I needed to step through fears, to put one foot in front of the other and to get to the next place. This is, they talk, I've heard people talk about coincidences, like coincidences. I had just celebrated a year sober, and at the time I still smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day, and I went to the corner deli to get a pack of cigarettes, and right in front of me there was a sign that said "Help Wanted, Part-Time," and I looked at it, and like I said before, I don't believe in that man in the sky, but it almost feels like there was a man there that just said, "Boom, like this is for you." And I looked at the guy, and the guy knew me because I was always and I said, "Hey, I'm available," and the words just came out of me. I didn't plan it, but I wasn't able to work until then. That was my first part-time job. And it took me 2 years of practicing all of these things before I was well enough to move forward. And through other help, through outpatient counseling, they got me to take 1 class in college, and boom. I think after 2 years, I started really, really recovering.
Right. So now you're on this path, and there's a lot of, I guess the best word that I can describe is like momentum. Now the momentum's like going forward. And how are you dealing with like the panic stuff and all of these fears that were like had you in prison?
Okay, the panic, I guess the panic and the anxiety subsided a tiny little bit at a time from, I guess, from the very beginning. I mean, first 2 weeks I was a mess, first month I was a mess, but then it got less and less. But it's funny, I used to think of it like this in early sobriety. I wear contact lenses since I was born practically, and I had contact lenses cases, and I'd have 10 milligram Valiums that I would break up into quarters, and I'd put them in a contact lens case and carry that around with me, and I'd just pop them throughout the day. When I got sober, I looked at every tool that was given to me like one of those little quarters of a Valium. So I remember I'd get on my knees and I'd pray. Getting on my knees was important to me. I talk about that in the book. People have different ways of praying. For me, it was really directed when I did that. And I'd pray like crazy, like I was talking to a therapist. And I'd feel like, okay, that was a quarter of a Valium. Then I'd do the deep breathing exercises that they taught me, and that was another quarter of a Valium. And then just I kept getting more and more. I'd write in a journal. Journal writing was important to me. And these were really simple things, but they were helping me. Going to a meeting at that time was another quarter of a Valium. And I looked at everything like in terms still of drugs and alcohol because that's what I knew. This is what worked for me was I kept getting on my knees and saying, whatever you are, whoever you are.
Not even using the word God.
Nah, you know what? I don't have a problem with the word God because it fits. So, like, I'll use that.
Right, but it's not necessary.
No, it's absolutely not necessary. I think people have to do whatever they feel they need to do. But getting on my knees, there were times, and I still even question this. Sometimes I think, like, scientifically, they've proven that we only use a certain percentage of our brain, and there's so much more going on in there. People know that, like, in accidents, like, women have lifted cars off of children. Like, we have this untapped power inside us. And sometimes I even think that it's just in, an inner unapproachable self, that we could get to, and we could get to it through prayer.
Like a spiritual self.
Yeah, a spiritual self or a higher intelligence within ourselves or different parts of our brains or different parts of, whatever it is. I don't know what it is. I don't know what God is. But like I said, I don't have a problem using the word God because I don't care. If people, it's
right.
Just easier to communicate like that. But for myself, I am 100% certain that power exists because I've tapped into it. And I've done stuff that, for somebody else might not be anywhere near impossible, but for me is completely virtually impossible. Doing this talking right here is an example.
Right.
Because for anybody,
yeah, but it doesn't. Listen, here's the thing. With Joe, I had to wrestle him into submission, but he's a natural and he's doing great. Because I think a lot of times, I don't think actually I know, just even the word God like scares people. And because rightfully so, some have their own idea. It's not their own idea. They have an idea that somebody else gave them of what that word is supposed to mean.
Mm-hmm.
And in this book, when you're going through all of these different exercises, whether it's, like when you're talking about meditation, or you have another chapter, collect failures, or go past your comfort zone, and, whatever, find gratitude. Like, these are all these different tools that at the end or throughout the process will help you access that inner spiritual love, where you can be like, listen, I can tell the guy at the deli that I'm available,
mm-hmm.
Where I couldn't leave my house before.
Mm-hmm.
And I can get on this plane that I couldn't get on this plane before. And I can be honest and just say no. Mm-hmm. And even if I'm full of anxiety while saying no because of my people pleasing and I want people to love me, I can still tap into that thing and just say no.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like the power of like the recipe, where it's just like, listen, I can take some of these, I've listened to the book like a bunch of times, where it's like you can take these different little pieces to get you past that wall of anxiety and fear. Mm-hmm. And I'm realizing that even if this is what I learned from the book, and now here comes the ball washing of Joe Baldazone. What I learned was that even if the thing that I'm scared of is true, but I still can face it, and it's not going to kill me, because the fear is what would kill me. I would be paralyzed with fear of saying no to somebody, or fear of when something's not going right, saying, I'm sorry, and I screwed up, and I'm willing to fix this thing. Mm-hmm. There were so many times that even happens now, like if I have a client and things aren't going right, the phone will ring, and I know I talk about it all the time, I have to make tough phone calls. Mm-hmm. And they're never easy. That's why they're called tough phone calls. But some of these things that are incorporated into my life allow me to just take a deep breath, let it out, and then next thing I know, I'm there. And then when I get through it, I can call somebody else, mm-hmm. or I can bookend it and say, I got to make this tough phone call. I'm going to call you when I'm done. Mm-hmm. Or those things are a lot easier for me to accomplish in my own personal life when I do like you talk a lot about exercise. Mm-hmm. Exercise is when I break through that wall in my exercise, the earlier part of the day, it's a whole different day for me. Mm-hmm. And I know exercise is a big part of your life also. He's not an old man, but like but you're not like 30 years old, but for your mental and emotional health, like that exercise is also a big pillar, no?
Oh, absolutely. I just want to say I'm smiling while I'm watching and love this guy because he's completely, like, everything he's saying is the truth about him. Like, I've watched him over the past couple of years, and he does just like get up and like, I'm doing it. And that's one of the things that, I don't know, people tell me, how can I say people don't think I look my age? And I think a lot of that might have to do with that. I really do try to, I never think that, I know I don't know everything. I don't even want to say I never think that, but I keep trying to learn. I keep trying to grow. And the exercise thing, something I paged, I'm going a little off topic, but I paged through my book real quickly before coming here because I wrote the book in 2014, 15, and I haven't really looked at it a whole lot since then. And the thing that I try to get across in my book, and what I think, if I were to say right now what the most important thing about it is that almost every chapter in there, they're short chapters, but every topic, I'll say, in there is super simple stuff that I think pretty much everybody knows. Or, I mean, there are some things that maybe people don't know, but it's easy stuff. A lot of it is just common sense. But the whole point of the book was that I wanted to try to inspire people to actually do them. And that's why, like, the subtitle of the book is 50 Things to Do Before Seeing a Psychiatrist, and how to actually do them. Because even myself, I know I need to be hydrated. I say in the book, I'm a camel. I don't know what it is, but I could wake up in the morning, have a cup of coffee, a small cup of coffee, like 8 ounces, and then I can literally go the rest of the day without drinking water. And so, like, I'll forget, and I don't know why my body's like that, but like, this is really simple stuff. It's just people oftentimes don't do it, like exercise, which is what would getting back to that. I think most people know that exercise makes them feel better. It helps their physical health. It helps their mental health. It helps every single thing about us. Like, we feel good when we're exercising, and everybody's, I'm going to do it. I'll start tomorrow. And just people just wind up flopping out on the couch. And it's just little tricks of like getting yourself to actually do it. I think you and I talked about this a couple of times. Like, there are days I bought a total gym. And like, I use that instead of weights since the pandemic. But like, going back to weights, there were days where there was no way I'm getting to the gym. I can't. It's impossible. I can't go. But I'd still put one foot in front of the other. And then when I get into the gym, say, all right, I'm going to do 25 pounds on a curling bar, 20 pounds on. I'll get a way to get me in there and just get started. Like, I'll do half the workout that I planned on doing, or even a quarter of the workout, and just do it. Like, just do this stuff, Find ways to make it so I remember to drink water all day long. Like, get out of my own way where I just actually do the things that I'm recommending in the book.
Yeah, I think for me, what works for me is that I have to trick myself into doing it, because it's my brain that is telling me 2 slices of pizza and Netflix sounds like $1 million, but 3 miles on the treadmill is $2 million. But I'm going to have to earn that. Mm-hmm. Where the pizza and stuff is like whatever, and it's such a temporary thing, And so I have to find all these different ways to trick myself into doing that kind of stuff. And it's hard. And many times it's asking for help. Many times it's like, I'll join an exercise class, or with my little kid, we will, well, not little, she's 15, but we'll do something together on a YouTube. Like I said, now it's with YouTube, there's almost like no excuse. I can be with my kid and I'll do a YouTube class on whatever. They did a Pilates class with their mom yesterday on YouTube. 25 minutes, like, nobody's saying you have to go and be an Olympian. Mm-hmm. But these things have lasting, habitual doing these habits will have a lasting effect on your mental and emotional well-being. Because the part of the book that's very important, that, it's in the chapter, this is like before seeing a psychiatrist, meaning that, like, neither you or I are doctors. Mm-hmm. And, we're not saying that people shouldn't be medicated. Mm-hmm. And what I just want to
interrupt you 1 second. What we were talking about before, I've been attacked on my book because of the title. Like, people have seen the title and attacked me on Amazon, however they can. And I think it's important to know that it's not saying instead of seeing a psychiatrist, it's saying before seeing a psychiatrist. And I would like to talk a little bit about that.
100%. That's what I want to talk about. Mm-hmm. Like, my opinion, based on my experience, is that these are things that can be coupled with mental well-being. I don't do this stuff instead of going to see my therapist, or instead of going to meetings, or instead of, like, this is not an instead. This is something that's coupled with any of these other outside things that will help me not want to jump off the bridge, or worse than that, not want to sit in anxiety and depression for days or weeks at a time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so the answer for me, everything has to be on the table, including medication has to be on the table. But it just doesn't have to be the first thing that I do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so what are your thoughts?
All right, I talk about a main experience that I had early in my sobriety, talking to somebody. I had friends who were in recovery that had different kinds of psychological issues, and even after 5 years, they wound up, well, one person took their life. That's what really inspired a lot of this book. But one of the things that I noticed, the woman who I spoke to one night when I was really losing it, was she said to me, Joe, she said, watch all of the people that are winding up in serious trouble mentally, and with like my friend who did end her life, and another friend who wound up in a mental hospital, and another friend who wound up drinking again and winding up locked up. She said, I promise you, all of those people will be in some way playing with their brain chemistry. And she said, that doesn't mean that they have to be drinking or taking, it's even through doctors. Like a lot of times doctors prescribe things and it may work for a short while, but then over time, like, watch what happens to them. And she kind of planted the seed. Like, her saying that wasn't all that powerful at the time, but the seed was planted. And I just started watching people, and I've been doing this for 37 years now. And I'm not saying that this happens to everybody who goes on medication, but most of the people that I see that are winding up in severe trouble, like 10, 20 years down the line, are people that chose that route as opposed to choosing a route of doing things holistically. I was full of anxiety, and if I write another book, the next book will probably be on anxiety itself. And that anxiety, I kind of befriended it, like, after a while, that it became motivation for me. And without that pain, I needed pain to exercise. You know, I needed pain to do a whole bunch. I needed all of that stuff, and I needed to do things that were going to heal me. There are a lot of people that say now we don't have, in America, we don't have a healthcare system, especially with mental health. We have a disease maintenance system. And I believe that. You know, I've seen people, like, it's really sad, but I almost mentioned a name. There was a girl who, early in sobriety, she had anxiety. She was afraid to go in elevators, and she had kind of mild anxiety. She was leading me around, helping me out, and she was a huge help to me. She was sober for a while, and then she said she decided to go on medication. A few years later, she was locked up in her house, and nobody's seen her since. And like she went. I've just seen that happen to a lot of different people. So having that as a focus and watching how medication can affect people gave me enough of a, okay, like that's going to be a last resort for me. And I've always, you know, gone as holistic as I could. The other important thing that I want to say is that there are people too, like yes, I have an aversion to medication, but I know that there are some people that absolutely need to be medicated. And in my own case, if I was suicidal, if I were homicidal, if I started having delusions of any kind, and I know that gets tricky because people sometimes don't.
No, like hallucination delusions, yeah.
Right, or if I was hearing voices or like things like that, I'd like, absolutely, that's what I'm, you know, I'm going to investigate, you know, going to a psychiatrist and doing that. Or even if I can't function, like if I lost the ability to function again, well, that's tricky because I know my way around this now. Like, I think I would be able to push myself through. But if I really couldn't function, yeah, it would be a consideration.
Right. And that's important to say because one of the things that we explore here is situational depression, where, you know, somebody who I don't know if I care for him or don't care for him, but I'm apathetic. I find him funny, Dr. Phil, because he's a funny guy. And just his accent and everything, and I don't know enough about him to really have an opinion without having a judgment. But one thing very powerful that he said, he was on Rogan once, and Rogan was making fun of him. He's like, listen, you've helped all these people on and off camera, whatever, and somehow you got famous with the Catch Me Outside girl, not with all these other people who you actually helped. But he said, and he was talking, he's like, our philosophy is, okay, you're upset, you're distressed, you're angry, you're depressed, you have panic attacks, you have all these things, right? These are symptoms. These are not like things, right? So this is his words, not mine. So he says, tell me what's going on in your life. Then they start telling them their tale of woe. He's like, okay, look, you're having a hard time having ends meet. Maybe your spouse left you and now you have the kids on your own, right? Your mother passed away. Financially, you're not doing so well. Maybe somebody touched you as a kid. You haven't really dealt with that kind of stuff. And nobody in that situation, he said, it would be abnormal for you to not be depressed and for you to not have anxiety and for you to not have these insurmountable fears of perception of, right, of these things. He said it would be abnormal if you didn't feel like that. So he would call it situational depression, where why don't we work together on trying to pour some water on these fires a little bit at a time. And as the fires and the debris is done, if you're still feeling, like you said, like suicidal and all of these other things, then maybe we would contemplate, you seeing a psychiatrist, whatever. But a lot of times it's situational, and especially with people who are in recovery, the psychological and neurological damage that you do to your body with drugs and alcohol for a prolonged period of time, right? Forget about the emotional stunted growth. We'll talk about that in a second. But like, if you're doing cocaine, you're blasting your receptors on and off for years at a time. Sleepless nights, sleep deprivation. They do that to torture people, sleep deprivation. And that's been a part of your life, along with, let's say, maybe you're doing opiates or whatever, and all of the dopamine, and what's the other one that makes you happy or whatever, that gets decimated, right, from these pharmaceutical drugs that you're buying on the street or whatever. So to think that you're going to be doing that for 15 or 20 years or 10 years or 5 years and then be sober 1 year.
Right.
And for all of that
to you,
right, like it's not possible. So then it's just biologically, like you would have to be Anunnaki from another earth for that to happen for you. So this book is a way to start to build some of that stuff back, the situational things.
Right. And it takes time.
It takes a lot of time.
I want to bring up something that you told me, but before doing that, this is something else also. When I titled the book, like it was intentional, obviously, but I didn't realize that there are some people that don't really understand what a psychiatrist is.
Right.
And a psychiatrist is not a therapist. A psychiatrist is not a social worker. And it's not even a psychologist. Like the difference, I'm pretty sure you know, but the difference is psychiatrists can prescribe medication. All those other people don't prescribe medication. And one of the things that I did, like some study on this way back, but especially in America, if you go to see a psychiatrist, it's essentially making a decision to be medicated. Like that's what they do. That's what they're taught to do. That's what they're trained to do. And that's generally what they do. You'll every now and then find a psychiatrist that won't do that, but that's not usually the case. And
At all.
Right. I did go to psychiatrists, and I did at certain points, because I was open to everything. I did try medication a few different times. And it ultimately wound up always not being the right thing for me. But one of the first times I went, true story that still to this day freaks me out, I told the doctor all of my problems and everything, and he said, okay. And he took his pad out and he wrote 3 prescriptions out. And he said this one, and he told, I don't remember like how he wanted, he said this one is for anxiety. He said this one is for depression. And the third one, he said, and this is to sleep at night. And I said, I don't have a problem sleeping. And I swear to you, he said, are you the doctor or am I the doctor? And I looked at him and I said, okay, you're the doctor. And I took those 3, and that was one of the first times I went to a psychiatrist, and I tossed them. I said, I'm not doing this. But the thing that I wanted to say, I don't think you mind me bringing up one of your stories, because
whatever you want.
Your story blew me away, because it was it's exactly what my book is written about. I won't tell your story. You tell it. Like when you went, I know that you went to a psychiatrist because of anxiety, and this is a 1 in a million psychiatrist that will tell somebody, or at least in my experience, 1 in a million in the United States, that will tell somebody what they said to you. But you tell the story.
Yeah, like what, and I, I've said it before, and which is great because it's just my story, so it's true. It happened, that I was drinking and doing drugs for a very long time. And I was losing my mind. I had maybe a year and a half of recovery. It was similar to Joe's story where like, I'm doing all of these I'm doing everything, right? When you had that time when they were like, oh, you're going to be on the farm. You're not going to be starting pitcher, right? So I was doing everything and I was losing my grip. I felt like I was losing my grip, right? And I went to a psychiatrist and he said, oh, it sounds like to me like you're bipolar. And that's
right. I've got that diagnosis. I've got a bunch of different diagnoses.
Well, here's the thing, and then I'll say this, and then I'll continue with the story. The thing is that I've yet to have somebody do a brain scan and say, okay, oh well, here's the chemical misfires, and this is why you need this thing.
Test, yeah.
Right. All of that stuff. None of that happens. I describe the symptoms to them, and then they just believe me, and they just say okay, and then they just make an educated guess based on the paper on the wall, which is fine. But it didn't work for me because what happened was, I took my sponsor's advice when he was like, because I came home and I said, listen, the guys tell me I'm bipolar. I'm gonna have to go on these things, and then I called my sponsor and he's like, look, as a sober person now, part of being an adult, at the time I was 25 or 26, he says, is to get a second opinion. Even if you agree with the first opinion, that's the thing. Like, I'm willing to try anything, including that. Just get a second opinion. And when I magically went into this lady's office in Park Slope, and I explained to her my symptoms, and I said, this guy says I'm bipolar, and blah, blah, blah. And she broke her anonymity to me and said, listen, I've been in recovery 20 years or whatever. I'm letting you know right now, if you're doing these things that you're saying you're doing, this is just you coming off the bottle. That's all that this is. If you still feel this severe a year from now, keep doing what you're doing. If you still feel this severe a year from now, then you come see me, and then maybe we'll talk about other stuff. And she saved my life. Because I would have,
I believe that
completely. I would have just taken what the doctor said. Like if the doctor tells me that, my blood work, like if I get blood work and they say, listen, you got low T, I guess I got to go to TRT and get some testosterone. Like I would, because I'm not a doctor.
Right.
But like my sponsor saved me. He was like, this is what we do as an adult, as a sober man. You just go get a second opinion. And I got so lucky. That's what happened.
I'm right there with you on that one. Like I said, that's what the book is pretty much about. The other thing, I know you originally said you wanted to maybe talk about the diet and sugar stuff that I talk about now.
100%.
So I quickly looked over that chapter, and one of the things, I don't even remember if I said it in there, but it still to this day blows my mind that somebody will go to a psychiatrist, and even, I don't know, some therapists, I guess, would talk about this stuff. Health coaches absolutely do talk about this stuff, but they'll write a prescription out before asking you what your diet is like. And the thing that really brought that to light for me was, again, an experience I wrote about in the book. But I was 2 years sober. I had gotten over my panic. Like everything was going really well. And I was just taking different suggestions. And I started working for somebody who owned a chicken market that a lot of people in Brooklyn know. I won't say his name. But anyway, I started working. I was just working Saturdays delivering chickens. And every day that I was working for him, I started getting panic attacks again. And they were a little bit different, the panic attacks. Like I was just getting really depressed, and I was shaking, and I had all of this stuff going on, and I couldn't for the life of me know where this was coming from. It was like happening all of a sudden. And at that time, I was just becoming a vegetarian, and I thought it was like, okay, I'm watching chickens getting killed every day, and like maybe that's what's doing it to me, or maybe the universe is telling me you shouldn't be doing this, Joe. You know, like this, whatever it was. And anyway, one day it got so bad that at a couple of years sober, I said, I need to get a beer in order to stop this. And I pulled up to the corner shaking. I went in, and it was strange that they had a basket of bananas there. And I said, I was shaking, so I said, let me just get a banana. I'll go sit in the car. I bought a banana, sat in the car, and I started to feel better as I was eating the banana. And I didn't get it. Like I said, did I just find the cure to anxiety? And to make a long story short, and again, I talk about this in the book, but I realized that I started looking, what's different about when I'm working at this place? And what was different was every morning he was buying us all Dunkin' Donuts and coffee. And I never thought about what I just ate whatever I ate. I mean, aside from the meat thing, but I realized that it was the donuts that were messing me up. And I said, like, how could that be? And I started like investigating a little and talking to people. And again, there was no internet. I couldn't just look up sugar effect on anxiety, sugar effect on depression, sugar effect. And they introduced me to a book, Sugar Blues, which is a little bit over, it's hardcore, this book, but it's interesting reading about a guy who changed his life just by cutting sugar out. And I said, holy shit, like, I took sugar, and those panic attacks and anxiety attacks completely disappeared. They were gone, like instantly. I don't understand why a doctor won't talk to somebody about what they eat first. And part of me thinks because people don't want to hear that. But it really is like that simple for some people. And it's not like quit sugar. I know that's a tough one for a lot of people. But to just start like finding alternatives, or just finding a way to lessen it a little, or to balance the sugar out. And there's just so many things like that are so simple. There are people that have vitamin D deficiencies, and it's been proven time and time and time again that this causes depression, sometimes severe depression, but the doctor won't say, let's check your vitamin D levels. Like, they don't do that.
Right. Or they could be anemic, right? Where they have low iron,
right.
And then they're lethargic.
Even the water thing with me still, if I don't drink enough water, I start, I'm not immune to depressions. I'm not immune to anxiety. Thank God I don't get panic attacks. But
right.
Yeah.
But I also think that what we're in the vein of talking about is that, with regular life, everybody has these challenges. Mm-hmm. Some obviously more severe than others. With anxiety, whether you have a job interview coming up, or things aren't falling into place the way that you believe that they're supposed to.
Right.
Or again, maybe you're not listen, if you are an adult human being and you are not actively seeking like some kind of therapy, even if it's what in some way, you're doing yourself a big disservice. That's my opinion. In whatever way. It doesn't mean sitting down on a couch and giving somebody $100. There's all these other different kinds of therapies and ways that you can explore to try and get some relief and to get a different perspective aside from your own perspective. But one of the things that this book was really helpful was, obviously with two things that you can couple together, and this is just my story, is I would get anxious because I had a lot of things to do, and then I would go right for the caffeine. Like, caffeine is not the cure for anxiety. And you talk, it's just opposite. Not right, but impulsively I'd be like, because my brain will tell me that if I drink this double espresso or Manhattan Special that I love, right? If I drank the Manhattan Special, I will have more energy to do these things that I need to do. That in theory, but the reality is I would take the caffeine and it would cripple me with more anxiety.
And then you'd be in even worse shape.
Right, where 1 minute. Where one of the things you talk about is making lists, where that would cure a productive thing instead of the
coffee.
espresso. We're going to take a quick break because Joe has to pee. When he comes back, we're going to go back with the making a list and the anxiety. All right, we'll be right back. Okay, everybody, we're back. That was our first, like, Rogan-esque, like, pee break because we've been talking for so long, which is totally fine. But going back to what I was saying, where the perception, where I would believe that the caffeine would help me accomplish all of these things, it would absolutely just put a barrier. It would make the fear even worse and the anxiety even worse, where practical application, like in the book, talking about just making a list. And then the list actually would shrink the anxiety, because in my mind it's trigonometry. In reality, it's like pick up the laundry, send this invoice, call this person, but it's like 5 things. But in my mind, it's 55 things, and going for the Monster Energy drink or whatever would just make that fear become reality, because now I'm too anxious to do anything. And then let me tell you, if I have that same day 3 days in a row, now I have 15 or 20 things that I need to do, and now that anxiety is really real. You know? So I think like that's one of the things that you spoke about in the book, where it's like very practical application where you say, okay, stop.
Yeah, and it's simple stuff. Like most people do that, or they know to do that, but they don't actually do it.
Right. Similar to what you were saying before, where we don't, you make suggestions and you share your story. You're not telling people what to do. Like a lot of times when I would get sad, or people in my house, they know when I'm sad because I'll eat like shit. That's the way that I punish myself. Like, because the eating like shit, meaning like I can get like a big Italian Leone sandwich.
I know you post pictures of it on Facebook.
Yeah, so all of that stuff. So, but that will, that will cause, I will get a little bit of a hit, like a little dopamine hit from that. But the crash, like you were saying.
Right, there's a price you pay.
Right. So how did you start to navigate away from that little bit at a time?
No. we talked about this a little bit.
Taco Bell.
But this is the truth. Yeah, I had Taco Bell yesterday. And it's like, I know when I do these things, just in case anybody gets the idea that like
he is not perfect.
Yeah, I'm far, far from it. Talk to my wife if you ever have any questions. But I don't like deprive myself of anything. And I went to school to become a health coach after doing a whole bunch of other, well, that was one of the last things that, most recent things I should say that I did. But they talked a lot about the whole not being perfect thing, and having, like, I like to apply what they called like the 70-30 thing. Like
what is that? Elaborate on that.
Well, with diet anyway, I try to eat as healthfully as I can 70% of the time. And like that'll look different on different days, but I won't deprive myself of anything. And Andrea and I, my wife's name is Andrea, we try to go on a couple of vacations a year, and it's funny because I don't know if you ever went on a cruise. I think we talked about it.
No, I have not.
But it's like an all-inclusive. All right, we train to go on cruises. Like we do as much exercise and in gym as we could before the cruise, and then like no holds are barred once we're on the cruise. Like I'm a vegetarian, so that goes without say. I was just always repulsed by meat. That was never a sacrifice for me. If I loved meat, I would eat meat. Right. Just so anybody knows, I can't eat meat. But outside of that, like we just eat whatever we want and as much as we want. And when we come back and we reel it in, like we're not going to deprive ourselves. I went out with my mom yesterday and we had Taco Bell. My mom likes Taco Bell like I like Taco Bell. But, I'll wake up in the morning and then I have oatmeal with nuts and bananas. Like I eat a healthy breakfast. We try to eat as healthfully as we can, but know that it's not the law, like if I'll have pizza too and I'm not going to beat myself up over it.
Right. And I think that's the crux of the book is and you have what's number 50, find your own way. Like none of this stuff is like set in stone. We're just like,
No, they're suggestions.
and even in your own life, it's suggestions where, you have these, you have a recipe where somebody can get some spiritual something, right? And you get some physical relief, and you get some mental help with all of these things that are not, not tied to medication, because the medication will work right away. It will work, but eventually it will not work. And this is things that I've seen up close and personal where people will be on medication and it works for a year. And then after about a year, 14 months, 16 months at most, it doesn't work the same. Then they have to switch to something else. Then they have to switch to something else. Then they have to switch to something else. And it's a perpetual thing where they're not doing everything outside of that to keep the depression and the anxiety and everything at bay. Right. They're just using the medication and that's it. And
it becomes easy to do that because you're feeling okay. So there's no, for me, the motivation wouldn't have been there to do the other things that I had to do, to get in the habit of doing the other things that I had to do.
Right. Because, the medication is keeping you from jumping off the bridge. And sometimes that's just enough for people. And if that's okay, if that's for you. I'm not saying to do anything else, but that there are other, you can be great in this life. Like you can be great. I can't even believe that you wrote this book.
I can't believe I wrote this book.
I remember when you were just like, dude, I got to take this class and then I got to write a book. I was like, on top of the 3 bands that you're playing in and the 2 jobs that you, so Joe went from somebody standing at a deli meat place to delivering chickens to growing into a successful musician and playing in 3 bands, having 2 jobs, and then saying, oh, by the way, I'm going to go do this nutritionist stuff too so I can really learn about the science with food.
If you don't mind me.
No, go ahead.
I'll try to make this quick, but it was really interesting.
We have all the time.
All right, and then you could, take out the bad stuff and... and, I did go back to college early. Well, after my second year sober, it took me 7 years to graduate, but I graduated. I wound up, I don't want to go through the whole story, but I wound up getting a job as a teacher, and I just went for practice for the interview, and the principal asked me when I went for this interview, it was funny as he said, so Joe, tell me, what makes you want to be a teacher? And I literally said exactly like this, I don't want to be a teacher. And I laughed, and it just snowballed after that. He loved it, my honesty, I guess, and I became a teacher. Hated it, and just kept looking for what I wanted to do. Like, to this day, I still say, I'm a musician. That always came first, and thank God I earn enough money playing music today to pay my bills if I had to. But I also do those other things, and I forgot the point that I was trying to make here.
Well, the point was...
I wanted to talk about how the book came about. I had a night job teaching, and somebody who was more qualified than me had to get hired for the job. And I had been doing this for about 4 years, and it paid $50 an hour back when... It was a lot of money for me.
It's real money now.
Yeah, it still is real money. And when I lost the job, I was scared. And I just said, okay, whatever happens, I pray like I always do. And they say when one door closes, another will open. And I wasn't sure how I was going to make up this extra money. And my wife suggested this school for health coaching. And she said one of her friends did it, and it was kind of expensive. I don't remember, but it was a few $1,000s. But I said, if I put this money in, I'll commit to it. And I looked, and it seemed like it was the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, and it was a holistic health coaching school. And I said, okay, I'm down. I'm doing this. I signed up. It was a year training, and I learned an enormous amount in there about even talking to people, listening to people. It's mostly, a lot of the teaching was learning how to just listen to people, because they say that we all have the healing within us. We have to find our own answers. And I finished the whole thing. I lost the job, so I did this. Had no intentions of writing a book, and I tried health coaching, and health coaching is not what I'm cut out to do either. I just didn't enjoy it, didn't want to do it, and I get an email from the school that they have graduate courses, and then another email that said one of the graduate courses was to write and publish your own book. And this is something as a kid, I always loved writing, but I'm not disciplined. I can't finish anything. Like, it's not my thing, but I said, I'm doing this. I'm signing up. And it was $1,000 for the course. And they said that when you take, there were about 250 people taking the course. They said the top 10 books, they'll judge the books, they'll read them, and the top 10 books will get their $1,000 tuition back. And that put a fire up my ass. I said, I'm finishing this. I'm winning. I don't care. I want this. I'm getting this money back. And there was a drive inside me through that I wrote the book. I got an editor. And this is the part that was miraculous for me. There was a deadline. I had to get the book up on Amazon. And the book, it was finished like from start to finish, but it wasn't edited. It was horrible. Like, it was a mess, this book. But my editor said, Joe, just put it up now, because if you want to win the contest, you got to get it up there. So I got the book up, and I didn't know that once you put a book on Amazon, it's there for all of eternity. You can't erase it. You could take it back, but it's going to stay up. And anyway, then I was forced to do all of the editing that I had to do, but I got that push that I needed. That's the only way that book would have ever gotten out there, because I'm a perfectionist, and I would have been writing forever. I got to, this has got to be perfect. That's got to be perfect. But anyway, the book got up there within the next 3. I won the contest, which was great. I was one of the top 10 books. I got
even with the book being crazy.
Yeah. Wow. Even with I mean. This isn't a bragging thing. I knew the people. I knew some of the people I was up against. I mean, I took writing in school, so I knew I had a little bit of an edge on them. I was educated in that area. So anyway, the book went up, and then they told me too. They were very clear on, if you sell 50 books, that's a lot for a first-time author. And I sometimes feel like I'm bragging, but I'm just really blown away by the fact that it sold over 20,000 copies. For a long stretch, I was making some money with the book, which was really cool. And I mean, things happened with advertising and everything. I changed a lot of things around, so I'm not I'm still selling books, which is great, and I'm super grateful for it. But I never, ever, ever expected that. I didn't plan that. It wasn't I didn't sit down and say, I'm going to be an author or any these things just happen, and it's going full circle. Going back to what I said in the beginning about turning my life and my will over to God's care, I still to this day believe that. My intention wasn't to write that book. My intention was to keep teaching. I was teaching health in the night classes I was teaching, by the way. But that's what I wanted to do. I got fired from that job, and then a book came out of it. And it wasn't my doing. It was just coincidences, and I believe, we'll make him that guy, the hand of God.
Right.
Something in the universe that just said this is what's supposed to be.
Yeah, now there's that German guy we were watching on YouTube who's reviewing your book and talking about it in Germany.
That completely blew. I'll admit, every now and then I'll type my name into Google, or I'll type the book's name into Google and see what pops up. And what it's talking about is, a couple of months ago, I saw that there was a podcaster or video blogs, whatever it was. A German guy who's seems successful and well known and popular, was reviewing my book and had a whole bunch of great. I didn't understand it, but I got somebody to translate, and they said he's saying all good stuff. I said, wow, this is another country.
That's so incredible. Listen, I do the same thing. Somehow, I just put the content out, and,
I remember, here we are 6 months ago. I don't remember how long ago it was. It could have been longer, but you called me up, said, Joe, I got to do this podcast, and I'm scared shit. You didn't want to do it. Do you remember that? And you called me to try to talk through it, and you did that, and now you're doing this.
Yeah, it's incredible. All right, guys, we're going to wrap up. Name of the book, 50 Things to Do Before Seeing a Psychiatrist and How to Actually Do Them, by Joe Baldazone. You can find it Amazon. I have the Audible. The Audible, Joe's not I torture him because he's such an incredible orator. I don't know. In his mind, he thinks he's like a mime, but he's not. So it's on Audible, Amazon. Where else? You said the Kindle, somebody can get it. Where else?
Yeah, Amazon's the best place. I think you get the best deal, especially if you have Amazon Prime. But you could get it anywhere, and it even showed up in a couple of bookstores, which doesn't generally happen. But my book did show up. I did searches in Barnes and Noble, and I think maybe somebody ordered a copy and it landed in there. But Amazon's the best place to pick the book up. But you could get it on Barnes and Noble too. You could go to their website or any place and pick it up.
All right, guys. We love you, Spiritual Experience. Thanks so much. Peace out. Okay, everybody. We'd like to thank you for joining us on the Spiritual Experience. Please don't forget to like and subscribe on all podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple, Google, Pandora, everywhere. And please find us on Facebook where you can become part of our family. We'll see you around.